You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. The bonfire's heat was a liar. It promised warmth, community, a shared celebration under the harvest moon. But for Alara, standing at the edge of the roaring flames, a deeper, colder fire had already taken root in her veins. It had started as a whisper, a wrong note in the symphony of familiar pack scents. Now it was a deafening roar. The air around her should have smelled of pine and damp earth, the scent of her childhood, the scent of him, of Kieran, her fated mate, the scent that was supposed to be her anchor in the world, but it was tainted, corrupted. Woven through the comforting aroma she knew by heart was a new, cloying strand, the heavy, intoxicating perfume of night-blooming jasmine, Lyra's scent. Her heart, which had been a frantic drum against her ribs all evening, seemed to stutter and freeze. The triumphant howls of the hunt, the raucous laughter of the Blackfang pack, it all faded into a muffled, distant hum. She was a ghost moving through her own life unseen until the moment of her execution. The whispers had chased her for years, of course. Wolfless, hollow, a broken omega, how could she ever hold an alpha like Kieran? She had clung to the one truth she thought unassailable, the mate bond. The sacred thread gifted by the moon goddess herself, unbreakable, eternal, her salvation. She followed the poisoned scent trail, her feet moving of their own volition, carrying her away from the firelight and into the deep shadows at the clearing's edge. The ancient sentinel oak stood there, a silent witness to generations of pack history. And there, pressed against its gnarled bark, was her truth, her end. Kieran, his powerful form, the one that had always made her feel safe, was caging the slender, eager body of Lyra. His hands, the same hands that had gently wiped a tear from her cheek just that morning, were tangled in Lyra's silver-gilt hair. He was kissing her. Not a stolen peck, not a moment of confusion. It was a deep, hungry, possessive kiss. A kiss that claimed, a kiss that erased. In her chest, the sacred bond didn't just crack, it detonated. A silent, violent eruption of shrapnel made of ice and fire tore through every nerve ending. She felt a phantom howl of agony tear from a throat she didn't possess, the cry of the wolf she had always been told was absent. This was no accident, this was a deliberate, brutal statement. Kieran pulled back, his breathing ragged. His eyes, once the warm blue of a summer lake, found hers over Lyra's shoulder. They were not the eyes of a man caught, they were chips of winter ice, hard and dismissive. Lyra turned, her lips curved in a smile of pure, venomous triumph. Her gaze swept over Alara's simple woven dress, and her contempt was a physical slap. Alara, Kieran said her name. It was acid dripping on an open wound. He didn't push Lyra away. Instead, the beta female rubbed her cheek against his chest, marking him again with her overpowering scent. The pack, sensing the shift in the air like wolves scenting blood, began to turn. Dozens of eyes emerged from the firelight, wide with morbid, hungry curiosity. The whispers grew louder, bolder, turning into a low, judgmental murmur. Kieran, the word was a broken thing, a wisp of smoke stolen by the cruel wind. She could feel the remnants of their bond writhing inside her soul, a dying serpent poisoning her from within. This isn't working. His voice was flat, clean, sharp as a hunter's blade. I need a real mate. A strong alpha needs a she-wolf who can run at his side. Not this, he gestured at her, a vague, sweeping motion that dismissed her entire existence, her quiet nature, her omega status, the profound, aching emptiness where a wolf should be. Lyra's giggle was the sound of shattering glass. He needs a wolf who can give him strong, alpha-blooded heirs, Alara, not barren heir. The word barren hit with the force of a physical blow. It was the pack's ultimate curse, the final condemnation for a she-wolf. Without a wolf shift, her body was considered a barren vessel, a flaw Kieran had once sworn meant nothing to him. You promised, she whispered, the words scraping her raw throat. She could feel the weight of the entire pack's gaze, their pity and scorn, a thick, suffocating blanket. Kieran finally nudged Lyra aside and stepped forward. For a terrifying, hopeful second, she thought she saw a flicker of the boy she'd loved. She was wrong. He grabbed her wrist, his grip unforgiving, and yanked her hand up. There on her inner wrist shimmered the faint, silvery mark of their pre-bond, a brand of promised belonging that now felt like a mark of shame. I reject this bond, his voice rang out formal and cold, using the power of his alpha bloodline. I, Kieran of the Blackfang pack, sever all ties to Alara Morrow. She is no mate of mine, she is wolfless, she is barren, she is nothing. The pain was beyond description. It was the amputation of a limb without anesthetic. The silver mark on her wrist flared with white-hot agony, then dissolved into nothing, leaving only an angry, scour-dread patch of skin. The connection was not just broken, it was annihilated. A scream built in her throat, locked behind her teeth. She was drowning in a sea of contempt. He released her and she stumbled, her legs buckling, but she did not fall. A worse fate awaited. As Kieran turned, draping his arm around a smug Lyra to lead her back to the celebration, the pack moved. They parted for their alpha and his new, suitable beta. Then, as one, they turned. They turned their backs on Alara. One by one, every face, every pair of eyes looked away, leaving her utterly alone in the cold, dark silence at the edge of everything she had ever known. She was an outcast, nothing, and in that absolute nothingness something snapped, not logic, not reason, a primal, desperate survival instinct, older than packs, older than bonds. The echoing torment of the severed bond was a ghost in her blood she could not live with. There were whispers, dark tales of a taboo ritual, a way to cauterize such a wound before it festered forever. You had to bind yourself to another. Immediately, it was madness, it was blasphemy, and it was her only thought. Without a sound, without a backward glance at the fires that no longer warmed her, Alara turned and fled into the hungry, waiting darkness of the forest. She ran from the laughter, from the pity, from the ghost of Kieran's betrayal. Branches tore at her dress and skin, roots tried to trip her, but she did not stop. She crossed the scent-marked border of Blackfang territory, her own home, and plunged into the lawless, dangerous neutral lands. Her frantic, tear-blurred flight had only one destination, the infamous, dreaded crossroads tavern they called the Howling Cask, a place for rogues, exiles, and those with nothing left to lose. It was far from Kieran, and that was all that mattered now. The Howling Cask was a wound of light and noise in the dark forest side. Smoke, thick and greasy, poured from its chimney. The air outside was a chaotic soup of strange scents, unwashed fur, stale ale, desperation, and danger. Alara hesitated, her breath forming ragged clouds in the chill air. This was a place of endings, not beginnings, but her ending had already happened. Pushing through the heavy, scarred oak door, she was swallowed by a wall of sound. Raucous laughter, the clatter of tankards, the low growl of tense conversation. The room was a sea of grim, hardened faces, shifters whose eyes held the flat, cold glint of survival. They all looked up as she entered. The conversations died in ragged patches. They smelled the clean pine and earth of the Blackfang pack on her, but underneath it they smelled the raw, bleeding wound of her rejection. It was a scent of fresh meat and open vulnerability. A few sneered. Most looked away, uninterested in another's tragedy. Her eyes, desperate and darting, scanned the crowded room. What was she even looking for? An anchor, a weapon, a fire to burn away the cold inside her. And then she saw him. He occupied the deepest, darkest corner of the tavern as if it were a throne. The shadows themselves seemed to cling to him, to obey him. He was immense, not just tall but broad, built on a scale that made the other dangerous-looking patrons seem like children. A heavy, hooded cloak of charcoal gray obscured his features, but his presence was a physical weight. It bent the atmosphere around him. The boisterous noise of the tavern did not touch his corner. A pocket of profound, intimidating silence surrounded him. His scent cut through the tavern's foul miasma like a lightning bolt. It was ancient, wild. It was the sharp, clean scent of ozone after a storm, the deep, cold smell of stone at the heart of a mountain, and something else, something untamed and terrifyingly lonely. It was the scent of pure, absolute dominance, of a king in exile. Driven by an instinct she couldn't name, Alara moved. The crowd parted for her without a word, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. She was walking willingly into a dragon's den. Her heart was a frantic, trapped bird against her ribs. She stopped before his table, her legs trembling. Her voice was a dry, broken rasp. She swallowed, forcing the words past the terror. I need your help. He didn't move, didn't look up. A half-empty glass of something dark sat before one of his large, gloved hands. She could feel his gaze on her from the depths of that hood, a pressure that seemed to weigh her very soul. I need you to bind with me, she whispered, the words tasting like ash and shame. Just for tonight, a temporary bond, two to sever another. A shocked silence rippled out from their table. To speak of a bond, even a temporary one, in such a transactional way was unheard of. It was sacred. It was a profound offering of one's essence. She was offering her neck, her blood, her shattered spirit to a complete stranger, a complete unknown. The stranger moved. He lifted his head slowly, and the shadows seemed to reluctantly release him. She still couldn't see his face clearly, just the hard line of a jaw shadowed with dark stubble and a mouth set in an unsmiling, severe line. But his eyes, she saw his eyes, they glowed. A soft, unsettling internal light, the color of molten gold. They were the eyes of a wolf so ancient, so powerful, that the man sitting before her was merely a cage for the beast within. He said nothing, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The phantom pain of Kieran's rejection screamed louder in her skull, a white noise of agony. She swayed, dizzy with it. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. She placed a trembling hand on the rough wood of his table. "I will give you anything." Those molten gold eyes held hers, unblinking. A deep, resonant sound emanated from his chest, less a word and more the tremor of distant thunder. "Anything." His voice was low gravel, a vibration she felt in her bones, not her ears. She nodded, a desperate, jerky motion. She had nothing left, nothing but this pain. With a terrifying, fluid grace he rose. He towered over her, a mountain of shadow and restrained violence. He reached out, his gloved hand surprisingly gentle as it took her chin, tilting her face up to the dim light. His touch sent a jolt through her, a strange, electric current that momentarily silenced the ghost of Kieran's touch. He studied her, the tear tracks, the desperation, the shattered pride. He leaned down, his voice a breath against her ear, meant for her alone. "You are asking to trade a yapping pup for a wolf of the deep woods, little one, are you certain?" She didn't understand the warning in his words. She only understood the choice, this annihilation or the one she carried inside. She gave another desperate nod. He let out a soft, humorless sound. "Very well." He lowered his head to the side of her neck. She flinched, every instinct screaming to run, but she held herself rigid. This was her choice, her penance. She closed her eyes, bracing for pain. She felt the whisper-soft brush of his lips against her skin, a shocking contrast to what came next. The sharp, piercing sting as his canine teeth broke the skin just above her frantically beating pulse. The pain was sharp, clean. But it was the power that followed that stole her breath, her reason, her very sense of self. It was not the warm, earthy energy of a pack wolf. This was a torrent, a flash flood of ancient, untamed magic, cold as the void between stars and hot as a primal forge. It roared through her veins, a cleansing, terrifying fire that scorched away every last trace of Kieran's scent, his memory, his betrayal. It burned the broken bond to ash. It left nothing behind but the overwhelming, terrifying reality of the man whose teeth were in her neck, whose arm had slid around her waist to hold her up as her knees gave way. The world dissolved, the tavern sounds faded into a distant roar. The last thing she felt was the solid, unmovable strength of him. The last thing she heard was a low, possessive growl that vibrated from his chest into hers. A sound that promised not freedom, but a new, unimaginable form of captivity. Then there was only darkness and the all-consuming scent of storm and stone. The first thing she became aware of was the silence, not a peaceful quiet, but a deep, absolute stillness that seemed to swallow sound whole. It was the silence of immense, ancient stone. The second thing was the scent. Gone was the sour stench of the tavern. In its place was a clean, crisp fragrance of beeswax, dried herbs, and him, that impossible scent of ozone and deep mountain stone, now woven into the very air she breathed, settling into her bones like a claim. Ilara's eyes fluttered open. She was not on a dirt floor. She was lying on a mattress softer than any cloud, enveloped in sheets of cool, heavy silk. Panic, sharp and immediate, lanced through her. She sat up, the silken sheet pooling around her. She was still in her torn, filthy dress, a pathetic stain on the opulence surrounding her. The room was vast, larger than the entire great hall of the Blackfang Lodge. The walls were dark, polished stone, hung with heavy tapestries depicting epic battles and legendary hunts. A fireplace large enough to stable a horse held a crackling fire, its light dancing over furs so thick they swallowed her feet. This was not a room. This was a throne room for a private king. Her hand flew to her neck. Her fingers met not a scabbed wound but a pattern of raised, smooth skin. An intricate, permanent scar. It hummed, a low, steady pulse of energy that resonated in the very center of her chest, a constant, thrumming reminder. The gaping wound of Kieran's rejection was gone. In its place was this formidable presence. It felt like trading a festering injury for a collar of living lightning. "You are awake." The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace, that same low, gravelly rumble that had vibrated through her in the tavern, the voice of the dragon. Her head snapped toward the sound. He stepped into the firelight and the air left her lungs in a rush. The hooded cloak was gone. He was a king carved from the very mountain his scent evoked. Impossibly tall, his shoulders a breadth of pure power beneath a simple, dark tunic. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, with strands of stark silver at the temples, tied back from a face that was all harsh angles and brutal authority. A jagged scar ran from his right temple down across his cheekbone. It was not a handsome face, not in the way Kieran's had been. Kieran was the sun-dappled forest. This man was the unforgiving cliff face. But his eyes, they held her captive, molten gold, glowing with that same unsettling internal light. They watched her with the calm, unnerving patience of a predator who knows the chase is already over. Who are you?" she breathed, clutching the silk sheet to her chin. He moved toward the bed, his footsteps utterly silent on the deep furs. He stopped a respectful distance away, which somehow felt more intimidating than a threat. "I am the man whose help you begged for," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the stranger to whom you offered anything." The word hung between them, heavy with the weight of her desperate promise. It was meant to be temporary," she stammered, shame heating her cheeks. "A ritual to sever my previous bond. It's over now, I can leave." She made to move, her mind screaming for the woods for anonymity. "No." The single word was not loud. It was a declaration of absolute, unarguable fact. It hit her with the force of a physical blow, freezing her in place. "The bond you initiated was not a tavern trick, little one," he continued, his golden eyes never leaving hers. "You took a spark to burn away a splinter, but you placed that spark into the heart of a wildfire. The bond holds. My wolf has accepted it. He has accepted you." Her blood ran cold. "Your wolf, but no one's wolf would accept a wolfless omega, a barren she-wolf." The old insults were ashes on her tongue. A dangerous flicker passed through his eyes. "My wolf is not like those of lesser alphas. He does not care for the mewling politics of pack status. He cares for strength of spirit, and he senses a fortitude in you that you do not even know you possess." He took a step closer. "As for who I am Torin Valerius." The name meant nothing at first, then fragmented lessons from traveling merchants, fearful stories told by elders around dying fires pieced themselves together. Valerius, the royal line; Torin, the Alpha King. The reclusive, near-mythical monarch who ruled all the northern territories from his impregnable fortress, Stonehaven, a king so powerful and feared that other alphas trembled at the mention of his name. The wolf who had ruled alone for 50 years, rejecting every highborn she-wolf, every political alliance offered to him. Ilara felt the world tilt. The silk sheet became a shroud, the luxurious room a magnificent cage. She had run from a pack alpha and thrown herself into the den of the alpha of alphas. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "It can't be. You're the king." "I am," he confirmed, his expression unchanging. "And by the oldest laws, a bond freely offered and accepted by the Alpha King is not temporary. It is absolute. You are bound to me, Ilara of the Blackfang Pack." "I am not of the Blackfang Pack," she snapped, a flare of her old pain breaking through the terror. "They cast me out." "They did," he agreed, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "And in their staggering foolishness, they discarded a treasure they were never worthy of." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her, from her tangled hair to her bare, dirty feet. "You have a new pack now. You have a new alpha. You are under my protection." "Protection?" A hollow, bitter laugh escaped her. "This isn't protection. This is a prison, a gilded one." "A prison," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "is meant to hold someone against their will. I am not holding you. The bond is one you sought." The logic was as cold and inescapable as the stone walls. This cage was of her own making. A servant, a woman with kind eyes and a stern face, entered silently with a tray of food, steaming tea, fresh bread, berries. She bowed her head to Ilara, a gesture of profound respect that felt utterly alien, and left. "Eat," Torin commanded, but his tone was not harsh. "You collapse from pain and exhaustion. You need strength." Defiance, her last shred of control, made her jaw tighten. "I'm not hungry." He said nothing. He walked to the tray, poured a cup of tea, and brought it to her. He didn't offer it. He simply stood there, holding it, waiting. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the frantic beat of her heart. The herbal aroma was calming. Despite herself, her throat was parched. Defeated, she reached out. Her trembling fingers brushed his as she took the cup, and a jolt of that same electric current shot up her arm, startling, intimate. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small. He watched her for a long moment. "For now, I want you to rest, to heal, to understand that the world that broke you can no longer touch you here." His voice was low, almost hypnotic. "Kieran of the Blackfang cannot touch you. Lyra cannot mock you. The pack that turned its back is a faded memory. Here you are safe." The word safe was a foreign, desperate craving. It almost broke her. And after that, she pressed, her voice gaining an edge, when I'm healed, am I to be your pet, your omega ornament in a castle? A low, terrifying growl rumbled from Torin's chest, a sound of pure fury that made the firelight seem to dim. The cup in her hand rattled. The predator was right there, beneath the skin of the king. You will never be a slave, he bit out, his golden eyes flaring. You bear my mark. Anyone who shows you disrespect will answer to me with their life. He took a step closer, the air crackling around him. You do not understand what you have done, Alara. You have bound yourself not just to a man but to a throne, to a crown. He reached out, his hand moving slowly. He didn't grab her. He gently cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. His touch was careful, but it radiated a power that stole her breath. I have spent a lifetime ensuring no bond could be forced upon me, he murmured, his gaze intense. I swore I would never take a mate. I built a fortress of solitude around this crown. He leaned closer, his scent enveloping her, terrifying and somehow comforting. And then you, a wounded bird with a storm in her soul, walked into a rogue's tavern and tore my walls down with a single, desperate plea. He searched her eyes, his own blazing with a ferocious, possessive light. You are not my prisoner, you are my queen. The words were a pronouncement, a prophecy, a sentence. Before she could process them, the great chamber doors burst open. A man in advisor's robes stood pale and trembling. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. The news has spread on the wind, the scent of the royal bond. The Council of Alphas, they are convened. They demand to see her. The word demand hung in the opulent air like a foul odor. Torin Valerius did not turn. His molten gold eyes remained fixed on Alara, but the flicker of something almost tender vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness that made the fire's warmth seem to retreat. A low, dangerous growl vibrated the very stones of the chamber. The advisor, a man named Kalen, flinched as if struck. They demand, Torin's voice was deceptively soft, a blade sheathed in silk. The temperature in the room plummeted. Forgive me, Your Majesty, Kalen stammered, his gaze locked on the floor. They urgently request an audience. The alphas of the inner circle are gathered. They say a bond with an unknown, a bond made outside the great houses, is a threat to the stability of the North. The unspoken words screamed in the silence, a bond with a wolfless nobody. Alara shrank back, the silk sheets a flimsy shield against the crushing judgment of an entire kingdom. The mark on her neck tingled, as if burning under the scrutiny of 100 hostile eyes. Torin's thumb stroked her jaw once, a possessive, grounding touch before his hand fell away. He turned his head slowly, and the full force of his regal fury landed on Kalen. The stability of my territories is my concern, Kalen, not theirs. I have ruled for 5 decades without their counsel on the throne's heart, and I will not seek it now. Tell the council I will meet them at midday, not a moment before. But, Your Majesty, they are insisting. And I am commanding. Torin cut him off, his voice dropping into a register of pure, unchallengeable power. It was the Alpha King's command, a force of nature. You will deliver my words now. Kalen's mouth snapped shut. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees, shot a terrified, pitying glance at Alara and fled. The silence he left behind was heavier, charged with a new kind of dread. Alara's hands trembled. They want to see the freak, she whispered, the words brittle as old bone, the wolfless Omega who dared to taint their precious royal line. Torin turned back to her. The icy fury was gone, replaced by something complex and unreadable. They want to see the woman who accomplished what no Alpha's daughter, no warrior maiden, no political alliance ever could, he corrected, his voice a low rumble. They want to see the one who holds my bond. They want to measure the threat. They want to destroy me, she countered, her voice shaking, just like my pack did. He moved to the foot of the bed, his presence dominating the vast space. Let them try. The words were a vow, quiet and deadly. The woman who wears my mark is not to be judged by a council of posturing wolves, she is to be revered. He gestured to a carved wardrobe. A servant will bring you suitable clothes. Bathe, dress, eat. I will return for you before midday. He started for the door, a storm contained in human form. Wait, the word burst from her, stronger than she expected. He paused, his hand on the iron latch, and looked back, a sliver of dark hair falling across his scarred cheek. Why, she asked, the question raw, scraping from the deepest, most wounded part of her soul. Why me? You could have refused. You are the Alpha King. Why would your wolf accept nothing? Torin was silent for a long moment, his broad back to her, the firelight painting him in gold and shadow. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the king, leaving only the wolf, the man, and a profound, weary loneliness. Because, he said the words, a rough, quiet confession to the stones, for the first time in a century, my wolf was not met with ambition, not with lust for power or greed for a crown. He turned his head just enough for her to see the stark profile. He was met with pure, honest desperation. A pain that mirrored his own solitude. His golden gaze found hers, and the loneliness in them stole her breath. He looked at you and did not see an omega, he saw a survivor, and he recognized a kindred spirit. He left then, the door closing with a sound of finality, pain that mirrored his own solitude. The ruthless, untouchable king was lonely. The concept was so staggering she couldn't hold it in her mind. She bathed in the sunken marble tub, scrubbing away the grime of the forest and the tavern, but not the memory. She dressed in the clothes left for her, not a gown, but sturdy, well-made trousers and a tunic of deep emerald wool. They were clothes for moving, for action, not display. She ate, forcing the food down, each bite a small reclamation of her own strength. When Torin returned, he found her by the fire, her back straight, her damp hair a dark cascade. She looked like someone steeling themselves for war. He had changed as well. He wore a black leather tunic reinforced with plates of polished steel, a heavy sword at his hip. He was dressed not for a council but for a battlefield. "You are ready," he stated. It was not a question. "I am not a subject to be presented for approval," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I will not be paraded." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good, that is the spirit my wolf saw. You will not be presented, you will be introduced. There is a difference." He held out his arm to her, not as a king to a subject but as a partner. They will not see a weak omega. They will see the chosen mate of their king. Walk beside me, Alara, lift your head, and do not, under any circumstances, show them your fear. She placed her hand on his forearm. The moment she touched him, the bond flared, a warm, powerful current that flowed from him into her, steadying her trembling legs, quieting the frantic beat of her heart. It felt like borrowing the courage of a mountain. Together they walked the stone corridors, guards snapped to attention, fists pounding chests in salute. Their eyes, wide with shock, flickered to Alara, but none dared to stare. Torin's pace was purposeful, but he never pulled ahead. The message was clear to all who saw she was with him. They arrived before immense, iron-bound doors. Guards hauled them open, revealing the council chamber. It was a cavernous, circular room, dominated by a massive round table carved from a single, ancient petrified tree. The air was thick, almost suffocating, with the aggressive, territorial sense of powerful alphas. At least 20 of them were there, the rulers of the North's mightiest packs. Scarred, massive warriors, men who ruled through brute force and cunning. They all rose as Torin entered, their expressions a volatile mix of respect, hostility, and sheer, undisguised shock. Their collective gaze fell upon Alara. The force of it was a physical blow. She smelled their instant appraisal, their dismissal, wolfless, weak, unworthy. Her hand tightened on Torin's arm. He didn't even glance at her. His golden eyes swept the room, meeting every alpha's gaze, challenging them, daring them to speak first. "You requested an audience," Torin's voice boomed, silencing the rising murmurs. "You have it." An old alpha, barrel-chested, with a frost-colored beard and a face mapped with scars, stepped forward. Lord Borin of the Frostfang pack, the most senior, the most influential. His scent was of icy wind and old blood. "Torin," he began, deliberately omitting the title, a blatant show of defiance. "We come as brothers, concerned for the throne. For 50 years you have stood alone, a bastion of strength. Now this." His eyes, like chips of flint, raked over Alara with open disgust. "You have bonded with an outsider, a stray. She carries no wolf spirit. She is a hollow vessel. This bond is a mockery. It weakens you. It weakens us all. You must set her aside." A chorus of growled agreements echoed around the stone table. Set her aside, the same words, the same judgment on a grand, terrifying scale. Alara's breath hitched. Torin's hand moved, his arm slid from her grasp and wrapped around her waist, pulling her firmly, possessively against his side. He turned his head, his lips brushing her temple as he spoke, his voice a low, intimate murmur meant only for her, yet carrying to every corner of the deadly silent room. "Do you see that old fool, Alara?" he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "He thinks power lies only in the strength of the claw and the howl." He paused, his grip tightening. "He is wrong." Then he raised his head, his voice ringing with the absolute power of the mountain itself. "This is Alara of Valerius. She is not a stray, she is not a hollow vessel." He paused, letting the new name, his name, hang in the air. "She is my mate, my queen. The bond is done. It is recognized by the old magic, and it is recognized by my wolf." He looked down at her, and in his eyes she saw not just possession but a fierce, blazing protectiveness. Her word, he announced, his gaze sweeping the stunned, furious faces, is now my word. Her safety is the safety of the throne. And the first of you to show her anything less than the reverence due a queen. He let the threat hang, unfinished, more terrifying for its silence. He looked directly at Boren, a cold, predatory smile touching his lips. You wish for me to set her aside? Then come, Boren, come and try to take her from me. The silence that followed was absolute, sharp, and deadly. The silence in the council chamber was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Lord Boren's face, already a landscape of grim determination, hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The air crackled, thick with the scent of enraged alpha, a volatile brew of ozone and bloodlust. Ilara could feel the combined pressure of their wills, a psychic assault meant to make any lesser being crumble. Her knees trembled, the old Omega instinct to submit, to vanish, screaming in her blood. But Torin's arm was an unyielding band of steel around her, and through the bond she felt not his anger but his unshakable certainty. It flowed into her, a strange, potent transfusion of courage. She straightened her spine. She had already faced the end of her world. What were these snarling, posturing wolves compared to that? Boren took a half-step forward, his massive hands curling into fists. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that promised violence. You would choose this shell over the loyalty of your pack alphas, over the security of the North. This is madness, Torin. She has poisoned your mind. The only poison in this room, Boren, Torin countered, his voice dropping to a lethally calm whisper, is your ambition. You have coveted my throne for decades, hiding behind a mask of loyalty. You see this not as a weakness in me, but as an opportunity for you. Torin took a deliberate step forward, placing Ilara slightly behind him in a gesture both protective and profoundly possessive. You will address her as your majesty, and you will retract your insult, now. Boren's face purpled with rage. To be dressed down so publicly, commanded to apologize to a wolfless Omega, it was an unthinkable humiliation. I will not, he snarled, spittle flying. I answer to the ancient laws of the pack, not to the whims of a king bewitched by a bar. He never finished the word. Torin moved. It wasn't a charge, it was an explosion of controlled violence, a blur of black leather and steel so fast it defied the eye. One moment he was standing before Ilara, the next he was across the room. His hand clamped around Boren's throat, lifting the massive alpha clear off the ground. Boren's feet kicked uselessly in the air. The other alphas stumbled back, their sense shifting from aggression to raw, primal fear. Torin slammed Boren against the stone wall. The impact echoed like a thunderclap. Cracks spiderwebbed through the ancient stone around the old wolf's head. You have forgotten your place, Torin hissed, his voice a low, terrifying vibration from the depths of the earth. His golden eyes burned with a feral light that was no longer human. You have forgotten who sits on the throne. You have forgotten who broke the armies of the southern sun and tamed the wild packs of the frozen spine. Allow me to remind you. He squeezed. Boren's face turned from purple to a ghastly, mottled blue. His eyes bulged. His hands clawed weakly at the unyielding grip on his throat. The sharp, acrid scent of his terror filled the chamber. Ilara watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Part of her was horrified by the swift, brutal display, but another part, a dark, fierce part she never knew existed, felt a vicious thrill. For the first time, someone was fighting for her. An insult hurled at her was met not with her silent shame, but with the righteous, terrifying fury of a king. My mate's honor is my honor, Torin growled, his face inches from Boren's. Her name is my name, your insult to her is treason, and the penalty for treason is death. He was going to kill him, he was going to snap his neck right there in front of them all. Stop. The word was quiet, almost a whisper, but in the suffocating silence it rang out like a bell. Torin froze, his head turned slowly, those blazing molten eyes finding hers. He was still holding Boren, whose life hung by a thread. Ilara stepped forward, her legs shaking but holding. Every eye in the room swiveled to her. She was the cause, and now she would be the solution. Let him go, she said, her voice finding a strange, quiet strength. Torin's jaw tightened. A protest rumbled in his chest, the beast within demanding blood. You have answered his dishonor, she continued, walking closer until she stood beside him. She could feel the heat rolling off him, the violent energy thrumming just beneath his skin. She reached out, her trembling hand settling on the rigid muscle of his forearm. You have shown them your strength, now show them your mercy. She looked up into his furious, bewildered eyes. A king who kills for an insult is a tyrant. A king who offers mercy for his queen's sake is a ruler. The words came from a place of deep instinct, from years of observing pack politics from the shadows. She had seen how true power was wielded. Torrhen's gaze searched hers, the feral light warring with cold intelligence. The bond hummed between them. He felt her fear, yes. But he also felt her resolve. Her plea was not for Boren's life but for his reign, for their future. Slowly, agonizingly, the tension in his arm eased. With a final, contemptuous shove, he released Boren. The old alpha collapsed to the floor in a heap, gasping and choking, clutching his bruised throat. Torrhen turned his back on him completely, the ultimate dismissal. He faced the stunned council, his arm reclaiming its place around Alara's waist. His golden eyes were cold as a glacier. "My queen has requested mercy for you, Boren. You will have it, this one time." His voice rang with finality. "This council is dismissed. Return to your lands, govern your packs, and remember who your king is and who your queen is." He didn't wait for a response. Guiding Alara firmly, he turned and walked from the chamber. The alphas parted before them like wheat before a scythe, their heads bowed, their sense a muddle of fear, resentment, and something new, a grudging, bewildered awe. They walked in silence through the stone corridors, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving Alara trembling. Torrhen's grip was grounding. He didn't take her back to the bedchamber. Instead, he led her up a winding staircase, higher and higher, until they emerged onto the windswept battlements of Stonehaven. The world sprawled beneath them, a vast dark forest stretching to jagged snow-capped mountains under a vast cold sky. The wind whipped her hair, clean and sharp. "This is what they fight for," Torrhen said, his voice low against the rushing air. "Land, power, the right to call themselves alpha." He turned to her, his expression grave. "What you did in there was more powerful than anything I could have done by snapping his neck." "I was terrified," she admitted, the wind stealing her whisper. "I know," he said. He reached out, his gloved fingers gently tucking a wind-tossed strand of hair behind her ear. The tenderness of the gesture, after such violence, made her heart ache. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Alara. It is action in spite of it. You showed the grace of a queen. A grace this kingdom has not seen in a lifetime." She looked away toward the horizon. "Kieran, he always said my quietness was weakness, that my lack of a wolf made me submissive by nature." A low growl, possessive and proud, rumbled in Torrhen's chest. "Kieran is a fool. He saw a still pond and thought it shallow. He never dreamed of the depths beneath." His hand cupped her chin, turning her face back to his. "Your stillness is not submission. It is strength in reserve. My wolf feels it. It is why he chose you. He is ancient, and he was tired of the endless howling of lesser beasts. He craved the silence and the strength within it." The raw honesty in his voice was a gift, the lonely king. Before she could respond, frantic footsteps echoed on the stairs. Kaelan appeared again, his face ashen, his robes in disarray. "Your Majesty, a rider from the south bearing the banner of the Blackfang pack." Alara's blood turned to ice. "Kieran," Kaelan gasped, bowing low. "Alpha Kieran claims his fated mate was stolen from him, taken against her will by a nameless rogue. He petitions for the Alpha King's justice. He is marching with his enforcers to reclaim what is his." The audacity, the lie, it stole the air from her lungs. Stolen, reclaim, he had thrown her away like garbage. A sound tore from Torrhen's throat, the pure predatory snarl of a wolf whose mate has been threatened. The air around him thickened with rage. "He will march to his grave," Torrhen growled, his eyes beginning to glow. "Muster the legion. I want his head on a pike before sunset." "No," Alara's voice cut through his fury. He looked down at her, confusion and rage warring in his eyes. "He is a liar and a coward," Torrhen snarled. "He humiliated you, now he seeks to use you as a pawn. He will die for his arrogance." "And what will that prove?" she asked, her voice shaking but clear. "That you are a possessive alpha just like him, that I am a thing to be fought over. His lies will become truth in the whispers. They will say you stole me, that you killed him out of jealousy. They will say you are ruled by your wolf, not your crown." She saw her words strike home. He was a strategist, a king, before he was a vengeful mate. His fury banked, controlled, sharpened into something colder and more dangerous. "What do you propose?" His voice was deadly quiet. Alara took a shuddering breath, the plan forming from a place of deep, defiant pain. "Let him come, let him stand before you and before me, let him speak his lies to my face in front of witnesses." He made his rejection public. She met Torrhen's blazing gaze, a new fire kindling in her own. "Let my rejection of him be just as loud. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Torin's face. It was not a smile of warmth, but of a predator seeing a far more satisfying way to destroy its prey. He looked at the terrified Kaelan. Send a raven to the border. Grant Alpha Kieran and a delegation of 5 of his wolves safe passage to Stonehaven. They are to be disarmed at the gates. They will have their audience at dawn. Kaelan bowed and fled, the relief on his face palpable. Torin turned back to Alara, his large hands coming to rest on her shoulders. His gaze was searching, probing the depths of her eyes. This will not be easy. He knows your fears. He was the one who planted them there. A tear she hadn't known was forming traced a cold path down her cheek. She hated it, hated that Kieran still had this power over her. Torin's thumb came up, brushing it away with a gentleness that felt more intimate than any kiss. Then we will rip those fears out by the roots, he vowed, his voice low and sure. He didn't take her to the royal chambers. He led her to a smaller room, a sanctuary lined with books and maps. A fire roared in the hearth and 2 worn leather chairs sat before it. This was his space, the heart of the man, not the king. He sat her in one chair and knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his warm, calloused ones. Tell me everything, he commanded softly. Every detail, every insult, every moment of shame. I will be your armor tomorrow, Alara, but armor must be forged to fit the wearer. I need to know the shape of your pain. And so she told him. The words began as a torrent, then a slow, painful trickle. She spoke of the years of whispers, wolf-less, hollow, the pitying looks, the quiet isolation of being an omega in a pack that worshipped only primal strength. She told him of the fragile hope Kieran had represented, the promise of the mate bond that was supposed to make her whole. She recounted the bonfire, the scent of Lyra's perfume, the cold, dead look in Kieran's eyes as he shattered her world. She spoke the words he had used to cast her aside. Wolf-less, barren, nothing. With every whispered confession, she felt the fury coiling inside Torin. He did not interrupt, but his jaw tightened, the muscles in his forearms bunching. The bond between them became a conduit for his rage, but it was a rage directed outward, a shield of fury he was building around her. When she finished, her voice a raw whisper, the room was silent save for the crackling fire. He let go of one of her hands and reached up. His fingers traced the intricate, raised mark on her neck, his mark. He branded you with his words, Torin murmured, his voice thick with a controlled, simmering violence. He tried to define you by what you lacked, but a true alpha, a king, does not see what is missing, he sees what is there. His golden eyes held hers, fierce and unwavering. He called you wolfless, but I see a spirit that could not be broken. He called you barren, but I see a heart with the strength to nurture a new age for this kingdom. He called you nothing. Torin's voice dropped to a reverent whisper. And in his blindness, he threw away a treasure beyond price. He stood, pulling her to her feet. He led her to a large, silver-gilt mirror that hung on the stone wall. He stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at their reflection, the towering, powerful king and the slender, fierce-eyed woman beside him. When he looks at you tomorrow, Torin said, his voice a low rumble in her ear, he will expect to see the broken omega he discarded. He will not find her, she is gone. His hand moved from her shoulder, his fingers tracing the bond mark again. This is not a collar, Alara, it is a crown. It is the symbol of my choice. He will come expecting a slave, he will find a queen. His words, his belief, were a balm on wounds she thought would never heal. She looked at her own reflection, at the fear still lingering in her eyes, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of the woman he described. The night passed in a vigil of quiet tension. Alara did not sleep. Torin stayed with her in the study, sitting in the opposite chair, a silent, unwavering sentinel as the fire burned down to embers. His presence was a comfort more profound than any words. As the first gray fingers of dawn crept through the narrow windows, a guard's knock echoed. Your Majesty, the delegation from the Blackfang pack has arrived. They are in the Great Hall. Torin rose, every inch the warrior king. He wore the same black armored tunic, his sword at his hip. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Are you ready? Alara took a deep, steadying breath. She thought of Kieran's sneer, of Lyra's triumph, of the pack turning their backs. She thought of Torin's fury, his quiet confidence, his hand in hers. She looked him in the eye. Yes. Together they walked to the great hall. The doors swung open. And she saw him. Kieran stood in the center of the vast, echoing space, flanked by 4 of his largest enforcers. He looked arrogant, confident, dressed in his finest leathers, playing the part of the wronged, noble alpha. His eyes found her, and for a fraction of a second, his mask shattered. He had expected a cowering prisoner, a bedraggled servant. He did not expect to see her walking at the Alpha King's side, back straight, dressed in fine wool, her head held high. His gaze flickered to the intricate, glowing mark on her neck, then to Torin's possessive hand on her waist. The color drained from his face, replaced by a dawning, catastrophic horror. He had not come to reclaim a broken Omega from a nameless rogue. He had come to the dragon's lair to demand the return of the dragon's treasure. And the dragon was watching him with hungry, golden eyes. The great hall was a cavern of cold, judgmental stone. Sunlight streamed through high windows in dusty shafts, illuminating the snarling wolf's head banners of House Valerius. At the far end, the throne carved from black, petrified oak sat empty. Torin did not sit. He stood before it, a mountain of quiet, coiled power, with Alara held firmly at his side. Kieran stared, his handsome face a canvas of disbelief crumbling into dawning, sickening horror. This was not his plan. He was supposed to be the righteous petitioner, the loyal Alpha seeking the king's justice against a rogue. He was supposed to reclaim his property and earn the king's favor. He had not anticipated the mark. He had not anticipated the look in Torin Valerius's eyes, a look that promised not justice but annihilation. Alpha Kieran of the Blackfang, Torin's voice boomed, echoing off the stones. It was not a greeting, it was the tolling of a bell. You requested an audience, you stand in our hall, state your claim. Kieran swallowed, his bravado visibly cracking. His enforcers shifted nervously, their eyes darting between their Alpha and the terrifying, silent figure of the king. They could smell the sheer, overwhelming dominance in the air, a crushing pressure that made their own wolves whimper inside them. Finding a shred of his rehearsed arrogance, Kieran puffed out his chest. Your Majesty, he began, his voice strained, I have come a great distance to seek your renowned justice. My fated mate, Alara Morrow, was abducted from my territory. In a moment of confusion, after a minor disagreement, she fled. I believe she was taken against her will by a rogue who seeks to use her against me. He dared to look at Alara then, attempting to infuse his gaze with pained longing, a silent plea for her to play her part. Alara, my love, it's over, you are safe now. Tell the king, tell him you were forced. The lies were so brazen they were almost laughable. Alara felt a tremor of old fear, the instinct to shrink away. But Torin's hand on the small of her back was a warm, steady anchor. She thought of his words, he will find a queen. She took a step forward, deliberately breaking contact with Torin, standing on her own. The movement was small, but it was a declaration. There was no abduction, Kieran, she said, her voice clear and cold, ringing in the silent hall. She saw his shock, the widening of his eyes as he heard a strength in her he had never known. There was no confusion, and our disagreement was you discarding me before our entire pack. She turned her head slightly, giving him a clear, deliberate view of the bond mark on her neck. And the man you call a rogue is my Alpha, my king. The bond between us was not forced, it was sought, it was offered, and it was accepted. A collective gasp came from Kieran's enforcers. Kieran himself looked as if she had physically struck him. Sought, he choked out, his face flushing an ugly, dark red. You worthless, wolfless creature, you would profane the fated bond for a night with a stranger. Before the last vile word left his mouth, a low, predatory growl ripped through the hall, a sound so primal it made the stone tremble. Kieran's enforcers stumbled back, hands flying to empty belts. Torin took a step forward, his golden eyes blazing. Wait, Alara said, putting a hand on his chest. The muscle beneath was rigid as granite. She could feel the violent thrum of his wolf begging for release. This is my truth to speak, not yours to avenge, not yet. Torin looked down at her, a battle raging in his eyes. He gave a slow, reluctant nod, his jaw clenched so tight she thought it might crack. Alara turned back to Kieran, her gaze unwavering. You speak of the fated bond, you who shattered it with another she-wolf. You who severed it before our entire pack, calling me barren and nothing. You nullified that bond, Kieran, you burned that bridge. I merely found another way to cross the river. Lyra meant nothing, Kieran insisted, his voice rising in desperate panic as his story unraveled. It was a moment of foolishness, a true mate would have forgiven. A true Alpha, she retorted, her voice sharp as shattered ice, would never have needed forgiveness for such a betrayal. He would never have committed it at all. The truth of her words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Kieran was left sputtering, his lies exposed, his carefully constructed victimhood collapsing into dust. He was no noble Alpha. He was a philanderer and a fool who had thrown away a mate, only to realize, too late, that he had discarded something of immense, terrifying value. I reject your claim, Torin's voice cut through the tension, each word a hammer blow. The she-wolf Alara was packless, bondless, and free when she came to me. Our bond is recognized under the oldest laws. She is mine, she is Queen of the North. He looked at Kieran with utter contempt. You came seeking justice, and justice you shall have. You publicly humiliated and disavowed your fated mate. For this you will make recompense. You will cede the southern hunting grounds of your territory, from the Whispering River to the Stone Ridge to the Crown, a tithe for the pain you caused. Kieran's jaw dropped. The southern grounds were the richest, the heart of his pack's wealth and food. You cannot, that is a quarter of my lands, my pack will starve. They should have thought of that, Torin said, his voice devoid of pity, when they turned their backs on one of their own. Furthermore, Torin continued, his tone leaving no room for argument, you will make a public apology. You will send a decree to every pack in the north, recanting your insults. You will state that Alara Morrow is not wolfless in spirit, and that your rejection was an error of your own weakness, not any failing of hers. This was worse than losing land. It was the complete destruction of his pride, his reputation. He would be a laughingstock, the alpha who had been humiliated by a king and then forced to grovel. I will not, Kieran snarled, his desperation boiling over into suicidal rage. I will not be humiliated by this bar. The world exploded. Torin moved, a blur of shadow and death. He didn't draw his sword, he didn't need to. His hand shot out and seized Kieran by the face. With a roar of pure, untamed fury, he lifted the Blackfang Alpha from his feet and slammed him onto the unforgiving stone floor. The crack of bone meeting rock echoed like a final judgment. Kieran's enforcers, seeing their alpha brutalized, broke. With cries of terror they drew hidden knives, a grave final insult, and charged. They didn't get 5 feet. From the shadows along the walls the royal guard emerged. Silent, clad in black armor, faces hidden behind wolf-fissured helms, they were the king's executioners. Steel flashed, swift and efficient. The fight was over before it began. The 4 enforcers lay dead or dying on the cold stone. Alara stared, her hand over her mouth. Torin stood over Kieran's broken, whimpering form. He had not killed him, he had simply broken him. Torin looked down at the pathetic alpha, his golden eyes glowing with cold, terrifying light. You were warned, he growled. You were offered mercy. You were given a path to walk away with your life. He leaned down, his voice a whisper that carried to every corner of the hall. You chose this. He turned to Alara, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. He held out his hand. This is not your justice to witness. Come. She took his hand, her fingers trembling as they laced with his. He led her from the great hall, leaving the royal guard to clean up the mess of blood and shattered pride. He led her back to the battlements, to the clean, cold air. She was shaking, not from fear but from the aftershock of the violence, the sheer, brutal finality of it all. You could have killed him, she whispered. Death is an easy escape, Torin said, his voice a low rumble. He guided her to the parapet, standing behind her, his arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. He will live, he will return to his pack, broken and humiliated, he will lose his lands. He will be forced to send out the decree, praising the woman he scorned. Torin's breath was warm against her ear. Every day for the rest of his miserable life, he will wake up knowing that the nothing he threw away is now a queen, and that her name is spoken with more reverence than his will ever be. That is a far crueler punishment, that is justice. She leaned back against his solid chest, drawing strength from his warmth, from the steady, strong beat of his heart. The wind whipped her hair, and for the first time it didn't feel cold. It felt clean. It felt like freedom. The ghost of Kieran, the shame of her past, they were not just gone. They had been scoured from the earth with fire and steel. It's over, she whispered, more to herself than to him. No, he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. It is just beginning. He turned her in his arms, his gaze intense and serious. Kieran was a symptom. The disease is the old way of thinking, the prejudice. Borin and the others still believe you are a weakness. We have dealt with the pup who yapped at our heels. Now, we must deal with the old wolves who are still plotting in the shadows. He cupped her face, his gaze burning into hers. I am going to make you so strong, so revered, that they will have no choice but to bow to you, not out of fear of me, but out of respect for you. You are more than my mate, Alara. You are the key to changing everything. Torin's words on the battlements were not a lover's promise. They were a king's decree, a strategic blueprint for war, a war not of territory, but of perception. He did not intend to merely shield his queen. He intended to forge her into a weapon of peace, an unassailable symbol. Her education began immediately, and it was relentless. Mornings were spent in the Royal Library, a towering circular chamber that housed the collective memory of the North. Kaelan, now her dutiful if perpetually anxious tutor, guided her through dense histories of the great packs, their blood feuds, their ancient treaties, their secret shames. She learned of Torin's father, the Mad King, whose obsession with pure alpha blood had nearly torn the realm apart in civil war. She saw how Torin's 50-year reign had been a brutal, silent stitching back together of a fractured kingdom. The prejudice against her was not personal, it was a relic of that bloody, broken time, a poison still in the soil. Afternoons belonged to Torin, not in the throne room but in the map room, the strategic heart of Stonehaven. A vast table held a carved, topographical masterpiece of the entire North. He taught her not etiquette but strategy. Moving carved wolf tokens, he showed her the web of power. Lord Boren's Frostfang pack controls the northern passes, he explained one day, his finger tracing a formidable mountain range. He grows rich on tariffs, but his warriors are arrogant, stretched thin. They are a hammer, and a hammer, he looked at her, his golden eyes intent, is useless against the wind. Power is not always about strength, it is about knowing where your enemy is weak. He was teaching her to think like a ruler, to see the world as a complex puzzle of ambition and vulnerability. He was giving her the keys to the kingdom. But the evenings changed her most profoundly. Torin took her to the sparring yards where the royal guard trained. The air rang with the clash of steel and the grunts of combat. At first she merely watched, horrified and fascinated. Then one evening he drew her into the center of the dusty ring. He placed a slender, perfectly balanced dagger in her hand. The hilt was cool, the weight unfamiliar. "You do not have a wolf's strength," he said, his voice calm and certain. "You will not win a fight through brute force, but you have a wolf's spirit, you have speed, you have a keen mind. And you have the will to survive, that is more than enough." Under his patient, demanding tutelage she learned. He taught her how to hold the blade, how to turn an opponent's momentum against them, where a small, precise strike could disable a larger foe. He was a terrifyingly graceful fighter, his movements a beautiful, lethal dance. He never hurt her, his control absolute, but he never coddled her either. He forced her to anticipate, to deflect, to fight back. In the sweat and dust of the training yard, the timid, fearful Omega was flayed away. A core of tempered steel was revealed, layer by layer. With every successful parry, every disarming move, she felt a new, fierce pride blossoming in her chest. She was not helpless. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. It was a constant, living presence, a silent conversation beneath the surface of their lives. She felt his quiet frustrations during tedious council meetings, the heavy weight of the crown. He, in turn, felt her small triumphs, the first time she correctly identified a pack's political weakness from a historical text, the first time she managed to sweep the legs out from under a young, overconfident guard in training. Their nights were spent in his chambers, but not as the court gossips whispered. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories. She spoke of her mother's gentle songs, he haltingly of the cold, lonely lessons of his father. He slept on a pallet of furs on the floor, giving her the massive bed. It was a gesture of profound respect that touched her more deeply than any grand declaration. He was courting her trust, not just claiming her as his mate. He was waiting for her. News of Kieran's humiliation spread like wildfire. His signed decree arrived at Stonehaven, a document of breathtaking self-abasement, praising Alara's indomitable spirit and blaming his own failings of character. It was posted in the Great Hall for all to see. As Torin predicted, Kieran became a cautionary tale, a punchline. The ceded lands were absorbed, strengthening the royal border patrols. The Blackfang pack was diminished, leaderless in all but name. But Boren and the other conservative alphas were not silenced. They did not challenge Torin openly. Instead, a subtle, venomous campaign of whispers began. They spoke of the king's blindness, of how the wolfless queen was making him soft, neglecting his duties. They whispered the old, cruel question in new, worried tones. An Omega who cannot produce a true-blooded alpha heir, what future does the North have? The poison was still there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting. One evening, after a particularly grueling session in the training yard, Alara sat by the fire in Torin's study, rubbing a sore wrist. He handed her a cup of tea, his gaze thoughtful. "They will test you again," he said quietly. "Soon, the Harvest Moon Festival, all the alphas will be here to renew their fealty. Boren will use the public forum." "I know," Alara replied, her voice steady. She was learning to anticipate the moves on the board. "What is your instinct?" he asked, not as a king testing a subject but as a partner seeking counsel. She looked into the flames, thinking of the histories she'd read of the old, bloody divisions. Confronting him directly on their terms, on strength, on airs plays into his narrative. It's a game we cannot win because the rules are his. Torin leaned forward, intrigued. So, she said, meeting his gaze, a spark of defiant strategy in her own, we change the game. We don't fight the storm on the cliff's edge. We show them the quiet, deep-rooted tree that survives it. A slow, proud smile spread across Torin's face. It was the first true, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his harsh features, making her breath catch. "Tell me more," he commanded, his voice warm with approval. And as she laid out her fledgling plan, not with the roar of an alpha but with the quiet certainty of a queen, the bond between them hummed with a new, potent harmony. The student was becoming a strategist. The survivor was becoming a ruler. The final confrontation was coming, but Alara was no longer the broken girl who would face it. She was being forged day by day into the woman who might just change the destiny of the North, and for the first time she was not afraid of the fire. She was learning to wield it. The Harvest Moon Festival transformed Stonehaven. The austere fortress was draped in autumn garlands, the great hall filled not with grim warriors but with the vibrant, noisy pageantry of the northern packs. Alphas and their mates, dressed in brilliant furs and polished leather, filled the benches. The air was thick with the scent of roast meat, spiced wine, and 1,000 competing perfumes. It was a celebration of bounty, of loyalty, of the coming winter. It was also a stage. Alara stood beside the throne, not behind it. Torin had insisted. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue, the color of the sky just before true dark, embroidered with subtle silver threads that mimicked the veins of ore in mountain stone. On her neck the bond mark seemed to pulse with a soft, steady light of its own. She met the gazes of the assembled nobility, the curiosity, the veiled hostility from Boren's faction, the cautious respect from others. She was the center of 1,000 whispered debates. The rituals proceeded, oaths of fealty were renewed, tithes presented. The atmosphere was tense, a wire pulled taut, waiting for the pluck that would make it snap. It came when Lord Boren of the Frostfang pack stepped forward to present his tribute. He bowed stiffly to Torin, his eyes deliberately avoiding Alara. "Your Majesty," his voice was a low growl, "I bring the bounty of the Frostfang and renew my vow to the throne." "The throne accepts your vow, Lord Boren," Torin replied, his voice cool and even. But Boren did not retreat. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the hall, a seasoned player seizing his moment. "Your Majesty, the Harvest Moon is also a time to look to the future, to the strength of our bloodlines. For 50 years we have had a king of unmatched power. But a kingdom needs an heir, a true-blooded alpha heir to secure the legacy of the North for generations to come." The challenge landed like a boulder in a still pond. The hall erupted in a wave of murmurs. This was it. The direct, public attack on her greatest perceived flaw, her barrenness, the one wound she could not heal with a blade or a book. Alara felt a familiar, cold dread clutch her stomach. This was the argument she couldn't win. Torin's hand, resting on the arm of his throne, tightened, his knuckles white. She saw the fury gathering in his eyes, the beast ready to roar and rend. But before he could speak, before he could unleash a tirade that would only reinforce Boren's point about a king ruled by passion for his mate, Alara moved. She held up a hand, a simple, quiet gesture, yet it commanded a sudden, startled silence. She did not look at Torin for permission. She stepped forward, descending the 2 shallow steps from the dais to stand on the same level as Boren. The act itself was a statement. She would not look down on them from a throne, but she would not be looked down upon either. "You speak of bloodlines, Lord Boren," she began, her voice calm, clear, and carrying to every rapt ear. "You speak of the strength of the wolf. For my entire life I have been judged by the wolf I do not have. You look at me and see a hollow vessel." She turned now not to Boren but to the sea of faces, the powerful alphas, their proud mates, their keen-eyed heirs. "You believe that strength is born only from an alpha's womb. You cling to the old ways, the very ways that allowed the Mad King to tear this realm apart with his purity wars. You believe in the supremacy of blood, but our king," she turned, her gaze lifting to Torin, and the love and reverence in it was so profound, so undeniable, it hushed the last of the whispers, "has spent 50 years proving that true strength lies not in blood but in will. Not in lineage but in leadership." She turned back to Boren, her gaze now sharp, clear, and fearless. "You worry about an heir, you think the future of the North rests in the womb of its queen." She paused, letting the question hang. "You are mistaken." She took another step toward him, not in threat but in conviction. The future of the North rests in its unity. It rests in abandoning the foolish prejudices that have kept us at each other's throats for centuries. It rests in recognizing that strength comes in many forms. She took a deep, centering breath. This was the moment, the gamble, the act of faith that went beyond strategy. She focused inward on the humming, living connection of the bond, on the well of ancient power Torin had shared with her. She reached for it not to borrow strength but to reveal it. A warmth began in the mark on her neck, a heat that was not burning but brilliant. It spread through her veins, a silver tide. Her eyes began to glow, not the fierce, molten gold of Torin's wolf but a soft, luminous silver, like the light of the full moon itself. Gasps echoed through the hall. Torin stared, his own rage forgotten, his expression one of pure, stunned awe. The silver light grew, coalescing around her, and then from the light behind her a form shimmered into existence. It was vast, spectral, and breathtaking. A great wolf woven from pure moonlight. Its form was elegant, powerful, its eyes pools of ancient, star-filled wisdom. It was her spirit. Her wolf not of flesh and blood but of soul and will. The wolf that had been sleeping inside her all along, awakened not by fate but by choice, by a bond of equals. The spectral wolf stood behind her, a silent, majestic guardian, its silver gaze sweeping the hall. "The goddess does not make mistakes, Lord Boren," Alara said, her voice resonating with a faint, echoing harmony as if two voices spoke as one. "She does not create hollow vessels. She only waits for the world to be worthy of seeing the strength she has placed within." The light began to fade. The magnificent, moonlit wolf dissolved into shimmering motes of silver that drifted away on the still air. The glow left her eyes. She stood there, pale and trembling slightly from the effort but resolute, utterly, profoundly changed. The hall was utterly silent. Lord Boren stared at her, his face a mask of shock, superstition, and a dawning, terrified awe. He had challenged a queen and been answered by what seemed like the goddess herself. The political argument was incinerated in the face of the mystical. His knees buckled, he dropped to the stone floor, his forehead pressing against the cold stone. "Your Majesty," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion, "forgive me, I was blind." One by one throughout the great hall, the other alphas, the doubters, the schemers, the loyalists all followed. They sank to their knees. They did not bow to Torin, they bowed to her. Torin rose from his throne. His eyes, those beautiful molten gold eyes, shone with a pride and a love so fierce it stole her breath. He descended the dais, took her hand, her cool, trembling hand, and raised it high for all to see. "Behold your queen," his voice roared, triumphant and joyous, shaking the very foundations of Stonehaven. "The Alpha is the strength of the pack, but the Omega is its heart, and our heart is strong." A single, unified howl of fealty erupted from the kneeling assembly. It was not a sound of submission, but of celebration, of acceptance, of a new age being born right there under the stone arches of the great hall. An age not of blood, but of spirit. An age of the moon-blessed queen. The silence after the unified howl was profound, but it was a different silence than before. The tension had not snapped, it had dissolved, replaced by a collective, stunned reverence. Alara stood in the center of it, Torin's hand firmly around hers, the phantom chill of her spirit wolf still tingling in her veins. She had done it. She had faced the abyss of their prejudice and shown them a reflection of something so far beyond it, they had no choice but to kneel. Torin led her from the hall, the crowd parting before them like a living sea. The looks were different now. No longer curiosity or contempt, but awe, wonder, and for many, a hint of fear. The fear was not of Torin's wrath, but of the power they had just witnessed emanating from the woman they had called Wolfless. He did not take her to the bustling feasting hall where the celebration would now truly begin. Instead, he led her up, through private corridors, to a part of the fortress she had never seen, a high, secluded balcony open to the sky where the harvest moon hung, full and heavy, like a silver coin. The moment they were alone, the regal mask slipped from his face. He turned to her, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks with a tenderness that made her eyes prickle. "Alara," he breathed, her name a prayer of pure wonder, "what you did, what you are." "I don't know what it was," she confessed, her voice shaky as the adrenaline receded, leaving her limbs weak. "I just reached for the bond, for you, and it was there." "It was you," he corrected, his golden eyes searching hers. "The bond is a bridge, what crossed it was the truth of your spirit. A truth my wolf has known from the first moment." He pulled her into his embrace, not as a king claiming his queen, but as a man sheltering the most precious thing in his world. She let her forehead rest against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart, breathing in the scent of storm and stone that had become her haven. It is not over, he murmured into her hair. Boren kneels today, but ambition does not die so easily. Others will question, will seek to test the limits of this moon-blessed power. The crown you have claimed today, it has weight, my love, a weight you must now learn to bear. She knew he was right, the victory was seismic, but it was only the beginning of a new kind of battle. Governance. She had proven she was not a weakness, now she had to prove she was a strength. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Where before her education had been private, now it became public, integral to the rule of the North. She sat beside Torin during open courts, not as a silent ornament, but as an engaged listener. At first, the petitioners, farmers disputing land, merchants seeking trade rights, minor alphas with border grievances, stole nervous glances at her, unsure how to address this new kind of royal consort. But Alara listened, truly listened. She heard not just the words but the fears beneath them. When a weathered farmer spoke of his flooded fields, she recalled a map she'd studied of the river tributaries. The Stone Ridge runoff diverts here in the spring thaws, she said quietly to Torin. A levee system managed by the Frostfang pack whose lands border his could benefit both. Torin had looked at her, then at the stunned farmer and the Frostfang representative in the chamber. A practical solution, he'd rumbled. Lord Boren's engineers will consult with this man by week's end. The crown will provide the initial materials. It was a small thing, but word spread. The queen did not just sit and look ethereal, she understood, she saw connections others missed. She began to travel with him, not just to the strongholds of great alphas but to remote villages, to trading outposts, to the camps of the nomadic packs who roamed the tundra. Torin's presence was a Chinese letter, a reminder of the unyielding power of the throne, but Alara's presence, hers, was different. She would walk among the people, her guard a respectful distance away. She would speak to the elders, laugh with the children, listen to the woes of a blacksmith or a weaver. She remembered their names, she asked about their families. Where Torin was the mountain, immovable, protective, awe-inspiring, Alara became the river that flowed from it, life-giving, connective, persistent. She was the heart he had spoken of, and it began to beat in time with the pulse of the kingdom. One afternoon in a sun-drenched courtyard within Stonehaven, she found a young girl, maybe 10 years old, crouched behind a rain barrel, crying silently. The child was painfully thin, her clothes too big, and she bore the faint, sour scent of fear and neglect that Alara knew all too well. "Hello," Alara said softly, kneeling a few feet away, not crowding her. "I'm Alara, what's your name?" The girl flinched, hiding her face. Myra." "That's a beautiful name, why are you hiding Myra?" It came out in a hiccuping rush. She was an orphan from a border skirmish, brought to Stonehaven with other refugees. The other children taunted her for being small, for having a faint stammer, for being useless. A cold, familiar anger settled in Alara's chest, not the hot fury of Torin but a deep, resolute chill. "Useless," she repeated, the word tasting foul. "They are wrong, Myra, look at me." The girl peeked through her fingers. Alara gently pushed back the sleeve of her own gown, showing the smooth, unmarked skin of her forearm. "I was called useless once too, for most of my life. They said I had no wolf, that I was nothing." Myra's eyes widened, her tears stopping. She knew who the queen was, everyone did. "They were wrong," Alara said, her voice firm and clear. "Strength isn't just about teeth and claws, Myra, it's here." She touched her own temple, and here, she pressed a hand to her chest. "Your strength is your own, and it is more than enough." She didn't just comfort the girl, she took her by the hand and led her to the fortress kitchens, settling her with a warm meal. She then sought out the master-at-arms and the head scribe. "This is Myra," she told them. "She needs a place to learn, to grow. She might have an aptitude for letters or for the precise work of fletching arrows. Find it." It was a single act, but it became a symbol. The queen's care, they started calling it. Orphans, children from poor families, those who were different or struggling, found a patron in Alara. She established a formal ward within the fortress, not a charity but a school, a place to discover one's strength, whether with a pen, a tool, or, for those who showed aptitude, a training sword. Torin watched it all, his pride a constant, warm presence in the back of her mind through their bond. He supported her initiatives, providing resources, his authority backing her compassion. The fortress, once a place of only martial discipline, began to echo with new sounds. The chatter of children in the courtyards, the hum of a small, bustling scriptorium, the focused silence of a new weaving room. The North was changing, slowly, not with the roar of revolution but with the quiet, persistent drip of a new idea that every member of the pack had value, that the strength of the whole depended on the well-being of all its parts. And at the center of this change was Alara, the moon-blessed queen, learning to bear the weight of her crown not with grim duty, but with a heart that remembered what it was to be broken and was determined to build something whole. 5 years, the turning of seasons had written a new story upon the north. The harsh winds still blew, the winters were still deep, but a subtle warmth had seeped into the stone of the realm. The whispers against the wolfless queen had long since died, replaced by legends. Ilara the wise, the moon-blessed, the heart of the north, she was no longer an anomaly, she was a symbol. Stonehaven itself had softened. Herbs now grew in once barren courtyards. The laughter of children, wards of the queen's care, echoed where only bootsteps had once sounded. The fortress was no longer just a seat of power, it was becoming a home. Ilara stood on the battlements, the familiar wind weaving through her hair, now threaded with a few fine strands of silver. She was no longer the frail girl who had fled into the night. Her quietness remained, but it was the quiet of a deep, still lake, confident in its own depths. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and the beloved scent of storm and stone enveloped her. Torin rested his chin on her shoulder, his own dark hair now more silver than black. The lines around his eyes were etched deeper, not by worry but by the rare and welcome habit of smiling. "You are looking at the horizon again," he murmured, his voice a low, contented rumble. "Are you planning to annex the southern kingdoms, my love?" She smiled, leaning back against his solid warmth. "No, just admiring our world." Her gaze fell to the training yard below. 2 figures sparred with fierce, youthful energy. One was a tall, rangy boy of 16, Lyon, an alpha-born orphan of a royal guardsman. The other was a girl, barely 14, small but impossibly quick. Kira, a wolfless Omega, discovered starving and frozen after being cast out by a pack in what was once Boren's territory. Ilara had taken her in, seeing a reflection of her own past. And Kira was winning. She ducked under Lyon's powerful lunge, used his momentum against him, and had her wooden practice dagger at his throat before he hit the dust. She then offered him a hand up, her grin bright and unafraid. Lyon clapped her on the shoulder, a gesture of pure respect. "She has your spirit," Torin said, his voice thick with pride. "She has her own," Ilara corrected gently. "That is the north we have built, a place where worth is measured by will, not birth." Torin turned her in his arms, his golden eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "I was a king of stone and shadow before you came," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he now showed freely to her alone. "I ruled a kingdom, but I did not have a home. You gave me that, you gave this land a heart." She reached up, tracing the old scar on his cheek. "And you gave a ghost a voice. You saw a queen when all I saw was a survivor." They stood in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the snow-capped peaks, painting the sky in fiery hues. The first stars appeared. "They are waiting for you," Torin said softly. She nodded. Tonight was the full moon, and a new tradition born from her first display in the Great Hall had taken root. It was not a display of power, but a communion. Hand in hand they walked to the Great Hall. The throne was empty. The hall was filled not with nobles but with the people of Stonehaven, guards, servants, stable hands, cooks, and the bright-eyed children of the Queen's care. In the center of the room, a space had been cleared. A single shaft of moonlight fell from a high window onto the stone floor. Ilara stepped into the circle of silver light. She closed her eyes, and as she had learned to do, she reached not for power but for connection, for the bond that was her anchor and for the well of moon-touched spirit within herself. It answered like a beloved friend. A soft silver light bloomed from her, gentle and ethereal. Her eyes opened, glowing with serene moonlight. Behind her, the spectral form of her spirit wolf shimmered into existence. It was more defined now, more real to those who saw it. Its presence was not intimidating, but profoundly calming, a silent embrace of wisdom and peace that washed over the hall. The people watched in reverent silence. This was their queen's gift, not a demand for fealty, but a blessing of unity. A reminder that they belonged to something greater, that they were seen, that they were part of the pack's heart. Afterward, as the light faded and she was just Ilara again, smiling and accepting quiet thanks, Torin watched from the shadows, his heart full. He had thought in his arrogance that he had rescued her. He knew now, with humbling certainty, that she had been the one to rescue him. Later in their chambers by the fire, she sat brushing her hair. He stood by the window, watching the moon-drenched landscape. "No regrets?" she asked softly, her eyes meeting his in the window's reflection. He turned, a slow, true smile gracing his lips. He walked to her, took the brush from her hand and set it aside. He knelt before her as he had long ago in his study and took her hands. "My only regret," he said, his voice a low, sincere vow, "is that I wasted 50 years on a throne of stone, when I could have been building a kingdom of moonlight with you." It was in this moment of perfect, hard-won peace that the discreet knock came at the door. Kalen entered. His face, which had grown more relaxed over the years, was once again pale and drawn. He held a small, sealed scroll of cheap parchment, not official vellum. "Your Majesties, forgive the intrusion." This was slipped to a guardsman at the lower gate, for the Queen's eyes only. The man who delivered it, he bore the faded scent of the Blackfang woods. A cold trickle, ancient and familiar, traced down Alara's spine. Torin was on his feet instantly, his warmth replaced by protective alertness. He took the scroll, sniffed it, then handed it to her, his jaw tight. Alara broke the plain seal. The handwriting was clumsy, desperate, the ink blotted in places as if written in haste or in darkness. "Queen Alara, they say you help the broken, that you remember he is worse than broken, he is a poison. Kieran is gone, lost in rage and drink. Lyra rules the Blackfang now with a cruelty that makes his betrayal seem kind. She hunts her own pack for sport, calling it culling the weak, the old, the sick, the gentle, they disappear. She has made pacts with shadows from beyond the mountains, men who smell of metal and greed, not wolf. They speak of new ore, of digging up our sacred grounds. She will sell the soul of our territory for power. We are not a pack anymore, we are a farm for her malice. There is no one left to howl for help. Please, if the heart of the North remembers its own pain, remember us." It was unsigned, a cry from the dark. Alara looked up, the parchment trembling in her hand. The ghost of her past was not gone, it had festered, it had mutated into something far more dangerous, and it was calling to her not as a queen but as the girl who had once been cast out into the cold. Torin took the note, his golden eyes scanning the words, turning to chips of glacial ice. "Lyra," he growled, the name a curse. "This is no longer a matter of a petty alpha's pride, this is corruption, this is a threat to the balance of the North." Alara felt the weight of her crown, heavier than ever before. This was not a policy dispute. This was a personal haunting and a territorial crisis wrapped into one. The heart of the North had just received its first true, gut-wrenching test. "She is using my deepest shame as a weapon," Alara whispered, the memory of Lyra's triumphant smirk vivid in her mind, "and she is defiling the very land that once rejected me." She looked at Torin, a new fire, cold and clear, kindling in her eyes. "We cannot ignore this cry." Torin nodded, the strategist and the protector aligning. "No, we cannot, but we must be smarter than we were with Kieran. This is a trap, Alara, bait laid specifically for you, for your compassion. She will be expecting the noble queen to come charging to the rescue." He crumpled the note in his fist. "So, we will not give her what she expects, we will give her exactly what she deserves." The warmth of their chambers vanished, replaced by the chilling clarity of a threat assessed. The plea from the Blackfang territory was not just a cry for help, it was a map to a battlefield, one laced with emotional poison meant for Alara. "She expects your heart to lead you into a trap," Torin said, his voice low and analytical as he paced before the fire. "She will have the wretched remnants of the pack on display, knowing you will see yourself in them. She will provoke, hoping you react with emotion, not authority." He stopped, his golden eyes meeting hers. "We must separate the two, the rescue and the reckoning." A plan began to form, not in a passionate rush, but with the cold, precise logic Torin had taught her. It had two strands, woven together but distinct. The first strand was shadow and silence. Torin summoned a figure from the depths of Stonehaven's intelligence network, a woman named Nisha who moved like mist and saw everything. "Take a team of your best ghosts," Torin commanded. "Infiltration only, map the Blackfang hold. Identify the dissidents, the ones who sent this." He handed her the crumpled note. "Create routes out, extract them quietly before Lyra even knows they are gone, they are the priority." Nisha nodded, a flicker of a smile on her lips. "A harvest of ghosts, your majesty, it will be done." The second strand was light and thunder. "We will answer the call," Torin said to Alara, "but not with a queen's tearful mercy. With a king's unanswerable inquiry." He decreed a royal progress, a tour of the southern territories to survey the king's peace. The Blackfang lands, now technically under the crown's oversight after Kieran's ceding of territory, would be their first, very public, stop. "We arrive not because of a secret note," Alara understood, her mind clicking into the strategy. "We arrive as our right to inspect our lands, to meet with the acting alpha." She said the title with distaste. "Exactly," Torin approved. "You will be the composed, untouchable queen. I will be the king asking inconvenient questions about trade, about security, about the well-being of the people on our land. We will force her to perform, to lie in the open. And while she is distracted by the spectacle of our court at her gates, Nisha's ghosts will pluck her victims from under her nose." It was brutal in its elegance. It acknowledged the heart's cry while deploying the head's cold calculation. The journey south was a stark contrast to Alara's previous flight. Then she had been a ragged fugitive. Now she rode at the head of a royal column, banners flying, guards in polished armor. The forest she had once fled through now watched her pass in silent awe. The message was clear: the forgotten had returned, crowned. As they neared the Blackfang border, the land itself seemed to grieve. The forests were too quiet, the game scarce. They passed a village that should have been thriving. Instead, shuttered windows and wary eyes watched them from the shadows. The air carried a new, foul scent beneath the pine, the acrid tang of fear, and something else of the smell of burned stone and metal. Lyra did not make them wait at the border. She met them at the edge of the main settlement, a calculated display of faux confidence. She had grown sharper, harder. Her beauty was now a weapon, all cold angles and gleaming eyes. She bowed, her smile not reaching those eyes. "Your Majesties." An unexpected honor, welcome to Blackfang territory. Her gaze lingered on Alara, a silent, gloating challenge. "Look at me now, look what I took from you." "The progress of the crown is never unexpected, Alpha Lyra," Torin replied, his tone flat, granting her the title with clear reluctance. "We are here to see the state of our southern holdings. Lead on." What followed was a macabre tour. Lyra showed them what she wanted them to see, a robust if sullen fighting force, full storehouses, but Alara's eyes, trained by years of seeing beneath the surface, saw the truth. The warriors were tense, their loyalty brittle. The stores were stocked, but the people in the surrounding huts had the pinched look of hunger. She saw no elders, no children playing. It was a pack stripped of its heart, its future. At a feast that night, a hollow parody of celebration, Lyra held court. She spoke loudly of strength, of purging weakness, of a new era of prosperity brought by a partnership with progressive allies from the Iron Hills who were helping them tap latent resources. "And what of the people who cannot fight in this new era?" Alara asked quietly during a lull, her voice cut through Lyra's bluster. "The elders who built this pack, the children who will inherit it." Lyra's smile turned icy. "Strength is the only inheritance that matters, Your Majesty. The weak are a burden. We have relocated them for the good of all." The lie was as smooth as glass and just as cold. It was then that a commotion erupted at the hall's entrance. A guard, one of Torin's, entered and strode directly to the high table. He bent, whispering urgently in Torin's ear. Torin's expression did not change, but Alara, through the bond, felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He rose, the hall fell silent. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding regarding the crown's property," Torin announced, his voice echoing. "My guards, in securing the perimeter, have come across a group of individuals being held in conditions unfit for any subject of the North. They claim to be Blackfang members, relocated, as you say." Lyra's face drained of color. Her eyes darted to a lieutenant who gave a slight, frantic shake of his head. Nisha's work had been discovered, but not as she feared. Torin had turned the covert extraction into a public exposé. "These people are under my protection as Alpha," Lyra began, rising. "You have no protection to offer," Torin interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Not when you have broken the first law of the pack to protect your own. These people are now under the crown's protection. We will speak with them, now." The confrontation was no longer about the past or about Alara, it was about the law. Torin had masterfully shifted the ground. As Lyra spluttered, her carefully constructed performance crumbling, Alara looked past her, out into the dark night. Somewhere, Nisha's ghosts were leading the truly vulnerable, the ones from the note, through secret paths to safety. And here, in the firelight, the first public crack in Lyra's rule had just been struck. The rescue had begun, and the reckoning was now inevitable. Lyra had been outmaneuvered. The queen had not walked into her trap. The king had laid one of his own, and in Lyra's furious, panicking eyes, Alara saw the first true flicker of fear. The shadows she had bargained with were of no use against the blinding, righteous light of the crown. The great hall of the Blackfang Lodge, once a place of laughter and pack bonding, now echoed with a tense, smothering silence. Torin's declaration hung in the air like a blade. Lyra stood frozen behind the high table, her beautiful face a rigid mask trying to contain her panic and fury. The relocated Blackfang members, a dozen frail elders, a few sickly adults, children with wide, terrified eyes, had been brought in by Torin's guards. They huddled together, a living, breathing indictment of her rule. Ilara's heart clenched at the sight. This was the cost of Lyra's strength. This was the reality behind the polished lies. She rose from her seat, her movement graceful and deliberate. She did not look at Lyra. She walked toward the huddled group, her guards parting for her. The bond with Torin hummed at her back, a shield of silent, furious support. She stopped before a trembling old woman, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of work. "What is your name?" Ilara asked, her voice soft, carrying in the utter quiet. "Mara, your majesty," the woman whispered, not daring to look up. "Look at me, Mara." Gently, Ilara placed a finger under the woman's chin, lifting it. The eyes that met hers were clouded with cataracts and a deep, hopeless fear. "You are safe now. No one will harm you here. Where were they keeping you?" The story spilled out in broken pieces. A dank, cold cave system at the edge of the territory, minimal food, no medicine, told they were useless mouths waiting for processing. The word sent a chill through the hall. Even some of Lyra's own warriors shifted uncomfortably. Ilara listened, her expression a calm lake over a depth of icy rage. When the old woman finished, Ilara turned slowly to face Lyra. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "This," Ilara said, the single word echoing with the weight of a judgment, "is your new era, Alpha Lyra. This is the strength you boast of, the strength to starve your own elders, to imprison children." Lyra found her voice a sharp, defensive hiss. "Sentiment is a luxury. A pack must be lean to survive. They contribute nothing." "They contribute memory," Ilara's voice rose, not in a shout but with a piercing, resonant clarity that silenced all protest. "They contribute wisdom. They are the roots of the tree you are so eager to chop down. A pack is not a weapon, it is a family, and you have betrayed yours." She turned to the assembly, her gaze sweeping over Lyra's warriors, over Torin's stoic guards, over the terrified faces of the rescued. "The first duty of an alpha is protection. The first duty of a pack is to its most vulnerable. This is not the law of the North. This is the law of the wolf, written in our souls. You have forgotten it." Her words, spoken with the absolute conviction of one who had been that vulnerable one, struck home. Some of the Blackfang warriors looked at their feet, shame coloring their sense. Lyra saw her control slipping. Desperation twisted her features. You speak of laws, you, a wolf-less charlatan who bewitched a king with moonlight tricks. This is a farce. You have no right to judge me." It was the wrong move. A direct, public attack on the queen's legitimacy and the king's judgment. Torin was on his feet. He didn't roar, he simply stood, and his presence expanded to fill the hall, a crushing wave of alpha dominance that made Lyra stagger back a step. "You will hold your tongue," he said, his voice a low, tectonic rumble, "when you address your queen. Her right is my right. Her word is my law, and we have heard and seen enough." He gestured to his captain. "Alpha Lyra is suspended from her rule pending a full crown investigation into malfeasance, tyranny, and dereliction of her pack duty. The Blackfang territory is now under direct royal stewardship." He then looked at the Blackfang warriors. "You will stand down. You will cooperate. Your first act of loyalty to your true pack will be to help secure the safety of these people you failed." For a moment, chaos threatened. Lyra's hand flew to the dagger at her belt. A few of her most loyal lieutenants mirrored her, but the majority of the Blackfang warriors hesitated. The spectacle of their betrayed pack members, the undeniable authority of the Alpha King, the chilling righteousness of the moon-blessed queen, it broke the spell of Lyra's fear-based rule. One warrior, a grizzled veteran, slowly unbuckled his weapon belt and let it drop to the floor with a thud. Then another, and another. Lyra was left standing with a handful of fanatics, isolated in the center of the hall she had stolen. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and venom, locked on Ilara. "This isn't over," she spat, the words a promise of pure hatred. "For you," Ilara said, her voice once again quiet, final, "it is." Torin's guards moved in, disarming Lyra's remaining supporters without violence. Lyra herself was led away, her screams of defiance echoing into the night, fading into the sound of the wind. In the days that followed, Ilara did not retire to Stonehaven. She stayed. She worked with Torin's stewards and the few decent Blackfang elders they identified. They distributed food from the overstuffed storehouses. They tended to the sick. They opened the caves and found more prisoners. Though weak, Lyra had been systematically eradicating. Ilara moved among them, a quiet, steady force of restoration. She did not perform miracles. She held hands. She listened to stories of loss. She helped a little girl find a lost wooden toy in the rubble of her old home. She was not a distant savior. She was a reminder of what a pack should be. One evening, as she oversaw the distribution of blankets in the main square, the old woman, Mara, approached her, leaning on a stick. She no longer trembled. "Your Majesty," Mara said, her milky eyes seeking Ilara's face, "they said you were wolfless, that you were nothing." The old woman reached out a gnarled hand. Ilara took it without hesitation. "But I have lived a long time. I have seen many alphas. I have felt many kinds of strength." Her grip tightened. "What you have, it is the oldest strength, the strength of the Den Mother, the strength of the heart that holds the pack together when the winter is cruel. You are no wolfless queen." A tear traced a path through the grime on the woman's cheek. "You are the wolf we have all been waiting for." The words from this woman who had suffered so much under the old, cruel ideas meant more to Alara than any accolade from a courtier. It was absolution. It was purpose. She looked across the square at the people beginning to tentatively help one another to rebuild. At Torin, who was speaking quietly with the grizzled warrior who had first laid down his arms, now appointed as interim steward, her king, her partner, her unlikely foundation. The ghost of her past had been confronted, not with vengeance but with a justice that sought to heal. The heart of the North had faced its first true trial, and it had not hardened, it had expanded. The rescue was complete, the reckoning was done, and from the ashes of Lyra's cruelty, something new was slowly, painfully beginning to grow, not just for the Blackfang but for the idea of what the North could be. A place where the strength of the heart was finally recognized as the greatest power of all. A year passed, a year of quiet, determined healing. The scar across the Blackfang territory and across Alara's own past began to knit, not with the fragile tissue of forgetfulness but with the strong sinew of new purpose. Lyra and her inner circle faced a tribunal not of alphas but of the people they had wronged. The testimony was damning, the sentences just. The shadow of her rule was lifted. The territory, under the stewardship of the grizzled veteran Roran and with the oversight of the crown, began to thrive. The mines Lyra had opened in sacrilegious pacts were sealed. The forests, once silent with fear, began to echo again with the sounds of life. At Stonehaven, life flowed on, enriched by the lessons of the South. The Queen's care flourished. Myra, the once tearful girl, now assisted the head scribe with a steady hand and a sharp mind. Kira, the wolfless Omega from the border, had become one of the most promising junior officers in the Guard, her speed and tactical mind legendary. Lyon, the alpha-born orphan, watched her with a respect that spoke of a future alliance far stronger than any arranged mating. Ilara stood on her balcony, watching the first snow of the season dust the mountains. It was a day of reflection. The Harvest Moon Festival was approaching again, a perfect circle from the moment her life had shattered and been remade. Torin joined her, wrapping a heavy fur around her shoulders. His touch was familiar, a constant source of warmth and strength. "The couriers have returned from the furthest territories," he said. "All alphas have confirmed their attendance for the festival." Even Borin, there was a hint of dry amusement in his voice. The old Frostfang alpha had become one of her most vocal, if gruff, supporters, his conversion as absolute as it had been public. "It feels like a closing of a circle," Ilara murmured, leaning into him. "Not a closing," he corrected softly, his lips brushing her temple. "A completion, the first full revolution of the new age." The night of the festival arrived. The great hall of Stonehaven was a spectacle of light and life, more vibrant than ever before. But the true celebration, the profound change, was evident in the faces. Not just the nobles, but interspersed among them were farmers and crafters whose innovations had been recognized, healers from remote villages and bright-eyed wards of the Queen's care wearing their first fine tunics. The pack, in its broadest, truest sense, was gathered. The oaths of fealty were no longer mere formalities. When each alpha stepped forward, they bowed not just to Torin but to Ilara, their respect deep and genuine. When Borin came, he went to one knee, his head bowed low. "My queen," his voice, once so full of contempt, was thick with something like reverence. "The Frostfang lands are peaceful, prosperous. We have opened our passes to all traders, as you advised. The strength you spoke of, the strength of connection, it has made us richer than any tariff ever did." When the formalities ended, Torin did not signal for the feast to begin. He raised a hand for silence. A curious hush fell. 5 years ago, his voice, powerful and clear, filled the hall. A broken woman walked into a tavern of shadows and asked a stranger for help. She asked to burn one life away to survive. I gave her a spark. He looked at Ilara, his love blazing in his golden eyes for all to see. But she did not just survive. She took that spark and she lit a beacon. She reminded a hardened kingdom that a pack is not a pyramid of power but a circle of responsibility, that the strong have a duty to the gentle and the gentle hold a strength that can move mountains. He stepped down from the dais and held out his hand to her. She took it, and he led her to the center of the hall, into the same spot where the moonlight would soon fall. "You have seen her power," Torin said to the assembly. "You have felt her grace. You have benefited from her wisdom. But tonight we do not celebrate a queen on a throne or a mystic with moonlit gifts." He turned to Ilara, his voice dropping, meant for her but carrying in the breathless silence. "Tonight we celebrate the woman, the heart of my heart. The soul who taught a king how to build a home, and a kingdom how to find its soul." He nodded to the musicians, not a booming fanfare but the soft, sweet notes of a northern lullaby, one of the very first things Alara had ever shared with him about her childhood. And then, as the first silver beam of the rising full moon fell through the high window, painting her in its light, something new happened. Alara did not summon her spirit wolf. She simply closed her eyes, opened her heart, and thought of the bond, not as a source of power but as a thread connecting her to Torin, to every person in the hall, to every soul in the north who had chosen a better way. The moonlight around her seemed to brighten, to shimmer, but the light did not form a wolf. It spread out from her in a gentle, radiant wave, a soft, silver glow that touched every person in the vast room. It was a feeling, not a vision. A feeling of profound peace, of absolute belonging, of being seen and valued. A mother's comfort, a leader's assurance, a pack's unwavering love. Tears glistened on hardened cheeks. Warriors felt a lump in their throats. Children stared in wonder. It was the essence of what she was, given freely. As the light gently faded, the silence was thick with emotion. Then from the back of the hall a voice rose, young, clear, and true. It was Kira, the wolfless guard. She was not howling a warrior's cry, she was singing. Singing the same old, sweet northern lullaby the musicians played, a song of hearth and home. One by one others joined, Myra's soft voice from the scribe's bench, Roran's gravelly hum from where he stood with the Blackfang delegation, Borin's deep, resonant bass. The hall filled not with a howl but with a song, a unified, beautiful, profoundly peaceful song of a pack whole and a heart unbroken. Alara opened her eyes, tears of joy streaming freely down her face. She looked at Torin, who was watching her with an expression of such utter, complete devotion it took her breath away. The circle was complete, the wolfless girl was gone. The moon-blessed queen stood in her place not as a ruler apart but as the beloved heart of a nation that had finally learned to beat as one. Her journey from outcast to queen was over. Her life as the heart of the north had truly begun. And as the song swelled around them under the light of the eternal moon, she knew with every fiber of her being that she was finally, completely home. The song in the great hall faded into a contented, humming silence, but the harmony it created lingered in the air, woven into the very stones of Stonehaven. The festival continued with a newfound warmth, a genuine celebration of unity that Alara could feel in her bones. The circle was not just complete, it was a foundation, strong and unshakable. Years continued to turn, their passage marked not by strife but by steady growth. The north prospered, trade routes bustled, connecting mountain holds to forest villages. Disputes were settled more often at shared council tables than on battlefields. The concept of pack expanded. It was no longer just a bloodline or a territory, but a shared commitment to the well-being of all. Alara and Torin ruled as true partners. He remained the unwavering mountain, the final arbiter of justice and defense. She was the flowing river, the connective force, the advocate for education, healing, and the arts. Their bond, that once desperate tether, had become the stable axis upon which the realm turned. One crisp autumn afternoon, many years after Lyra's defeat, Alara walked through the thriving gardens of Stonehaven. They were her creation, a patchwork of hardy northern blooms, medicinal herbs, and quiet sitting spaces where anyone could find a moment of peace. She was no longer young, her dark hair now more silver than black, her face lined with smiles and quiet wisdom. Yet her eyes held the same clear, calm light, and her spirit wolf, when she chose to call it, shone even brighter. She stopped before a particular plot, a bed of night-blooming moonflowers, their silvery petals closed against the day. A young woman knelt there, carefully tending the soil. She had Alara's thoughtful eyes and Torin's strong jaw, but her spirit was entirely her own, Anya, their daughter. Not born of Alara's womb, for that was not the path the moon goddess had given her, but of their hearts. They had found Anya as a babe, abandoned at the gates of Stonehaven during a harsh winter storm, a tiny, silent thing wrapped in rags. Alara had taken one look into the infant's calm, knowing eyes and felt a pull deeper than any biology. Torin, seeing the love and certainty in his mate's gaze, had simply nodded. "She is ours," he had said, and it was law, it was love, it was fact. Anya had grown under the double sun of their devotion. She had Torin's strategic mind and unshakable courage. She had Alara's empathy and her unique, deep connection to the quieter magics of the world, and she had something uniquely hers, a wolf. A beautiful, powerful she-wolf with a coat the color of twilight, a gift from the goddess that silenced the last, lingering whispers about lineage forever. The heir to the northern throne was both a formidable alpha and the spiritual daughter of the moon-blessed queen. She was the living embodiment of the new north. The frost will come early this year, Anya said without looking up, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the earth and air. We should harvest the final rootstocks tomorrow. Your father's stewards will grumble about the schedule, Alara said, a smile in her voice. Anya finally looked up, her grin fierce and bright. Let them grumble, the gardens are under the queen's protection, and the crown princess's command. Alara laughed, the sound light and free. She sat on a nearby stone bench, patting the space beside her. Anya joined her, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder, a gesture of trust and love she had never outgrown. The council from the Southern Sun Territories arrives next week, Anya said, her tone shifting to the practical. They seek a formal alliance. They've heard stories of the peace here, of the strength that doesn't require conquest. They will see it for themselves, Alara said, stroking her daughter's hair, and they will see you, the future. A future you built, Anya whispered, her voice thick with emotion, from nothing. From love, Alara corrected gently, from a choice made in a dark tavern, from the belief of a lonely king. From the courage of people who chose to be kind. She looked out over the gardens, toward the training yards where the shouts of Kira's newest recruits echoed, toward the scriptorium where Myra now taught others to read and write. We built it together, as a pack. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of glory, Torin found them there. He was older, his frame still powerful but his steps a little slower, his hair fully silver. But his eyes, when they rested on his mate and his daughter, held the same molten gold fire, softened by a lifetime of happiness he'd never dreamed possible. He sat beside Alara, taking her hand, their fingers interlacing, the bond mark on her neck glowing softly in the twilight. No words were needed. The story was written in the peace of the realm, in the laughter from the kitchens, in the confident stride of their daughter. Later, under the glittering blanket of stars, the three of them stood on the battlements where it had all truly begun. Anya was between them, a bridge of past and future. Tell me the story again, Anya asked, though she knew it by heart, the real beginning. Torin's arm was around Alara, hers around Anya. It began with a scent of betrayal, he rumbled, his voice a beloved familiar sound, and a flight into the dark. And it began, Alara continued, her voice a gentle counterpoint, with a desperate choice and a kindness offered in the shadows. And it led here, Anya finished, her voice full of wonder and strength, to a kingdom of moonlight, to a legacy not of blood but of heart. They stood in silence, the rulers of the north, watching over their domain. The forests were peaceful, the mountains stood guard, the people were safe. The heart of the north beat strong, steady, and true. Ilara, the wolfless Omega, was gone. In her place stood Alara Valerius, the moon-blessed queen, the heart of a king, the mother of a new age. Her story was one of survival, of love, of quiet, unyielding strength that had changed the world. She had been called nothing, she had become everything. And as the full moon rose, bathing them all in its silvery light, the legacy of that lonely girl in the tavern was secure. It lived in the song of the pack, in the peace of the land, and in the bright, fearless eyes of the daughter who would carry their love into the future forever. Like, subscribe, and comment for part 2.